Could Jon Jones continue to dominate at the heavyweight division? Jon is one of the most talented and one of the most successful fighters in UFC history, where he's done most of his damage at light heavyweight and is currently undefeated. But with Jon preparing his body for the heavyweight division, alongside with the fact that he hasn't fought in a little bit now, the real question is, how would Jon perform at the heavyweight division? But quickly before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy MMA. I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. Jon Jones hasn't fought in a while. The last time he fought was against Dominic Reyes all the way back in early 2020, so it's been over 2 full years since Jon has fought last. And typically when a fighter has gone that long without fighting, questions start to come up about octagon rust, which certainly are there for Jon, but at the same time he's also making a transition to heavyweight, so there certainly are some questions on how Jon would perform. Now in my opinion, if Jon were to stay at light heavyweight, I think he would dominate a relatively weak division, but the move to heavyweight is certainly a very interesting one. But before we can determine how well Jon would perform at heavyweight, let's quickly look at a few different potential matchups. Now the first matchup that I want to touch upon is Stipe Miocic. Now this is a matchup that has been talked about for a very long time now, and it seems like it will come to fruition, as it was also on the UFC's official board in Dana White's office in a video that I'm sure most of you have already seen at this point, and it's looking like it's going to happen at UFC 277 in July. Now in my opinion, if this fight happens or doesn't happen in July, it doesn't really matter. I think this is basically a guarantee to happen eventually. So let's take a closer look into this potential matchup. So on the feet, I would definitely give the edge to Jon Jones. Jon has a very diverse skill set on the feet. He has phenomenal kicks, either kicks to the leg, an elliptical kick to the knee, a front kick to the body, a side kick to the body, a side kick to the head. He also has the ability to throw a front kick to the head. In terms of his hands, he has a really nice jab, a nice right cross. He could switch stances, fight from either stance. And overall, in terms of his offense, he's not necessarily one of the best stand-up fighters in the UFC, but he's certainly one of the most diverse. But in terms of his stand-up defense, at least at light heavyweight, Jon was absolutely elite, and you would have no reason to believe that he wouldn't be, even at heavyweight. And he might even be better at heavyweight due to the fact that most of the fighters are slower, obviously. But Jon is one of those guys that don't take the full brunt of any of the punches, even if he does get caught. Most of the time when you see Jon get caught, it's with the tail end of a punch due to his great range management, and due to that, he doesn't necessarily get all that hurt in most of his fights. Now he also has a phenomenal chin that helps him out tremendously, and he may need to lean on that chin a little bit more at heavyweight due to the fact that obviously these guys are going to punch a lot harder than they did at light heavyweight. But either way, Jon's defense in terms of his stand-up is certainly one of the best in the UFC. But in terms of their wrestling, this is really where it gets interesting, because Jon is obviously known as a phenomenal wrestler, but at the same time Stipe Miocic is also known as a phenomenal wrestler. And typically when you have two phenomenal wrestlers going head to head, sometimes what happens is the wrestling cancels out and it turns out to just be a stand and bang match. The perfect example of this is Colby Covington versus Kamaru Usman, especially in their first matchup, because obviously Kamaru and Colby are both known as phenomenal wrestlers, but in their first matchup it was solely stand and bang. There was no wrestling whatsoever. And even in their second matchup, although Colby did look to add in some more wrestling, for the most part it was still only a stand and bang contest. And I'm not necessarily saying this matchup between Jon and Stipe would be the exact same thing as that, where it would only be stand and bang and no wrestling whatsoever, but it certainly is a possibility that that could happen. But in my opinion, one or both of these guys are going to look to shoot, at least at certain points in this fight. But the real interesting thing to me personally would be who would actually shoot on the other guy, and if they do shoot, would they be successful in the takedown, and if they do get the takedown, what would they be able to do with that? That's going to be the real interesting thing to me personally. But in terms of who's better in the wrestling department, I don't necessarily know. It's pretty clear that both of these guys are extremely elite, and it's just going to be very interesting to see what happens in terms of this. But overall, in this potential matchup, as I did mention before, I think this is a very favorable matchup for Jon, due to the fact that Stipe isn't necessarily a big heavyweight. He's kind of a small heavyweight, honestly, which would help for Jon's transition to heavyweight, while at the same time Jon certainly having an advantage on the feet, as well as him being a phenomenal wrestler to potentially cancel out Stipe's wrestling. And overall, in this potential matchup, I would pick Jon Jones by decision. Now that matchup between Stipe and Jon would probably be for the interim title, so assuming Jon does win that matchup, he will go up against Francis Ngannou after Francis recovers from his injuries, as well as after he does go out and box Tyson Fury, assuming that does happen. But that could also take some time, so it would be very interesting to see what the UFC does do if Jon does win the interim belt, if of course that does happen with Stipe. Now another potential matchup for Jon Jones would be Ciryl Gane. Now this is a matchup that I don't think will happen, at least immediately for Jon, but let's quickly take a deeper look into this potential matchup. Now on the feet, in my opinion, I think the advantage would go to Ciryl Gane. Now I mentioned before in the video that Jon is certainly phenomenal in terms of his stand-up, and he's very diverse as well, but the big reason why I think Ciryl would have the advantage is just due to how fast he is. And it's crazy saying that someone at heavyweight is so much faster than a guy coming from light heavyweight moving up to heavyweight, but that's certainly the case with Ciryl. Ciryl also does a phenomenal job at keeping distance and only coming in when Jon wouldn't be able to throw back. He throws nice kicks to the legs, nice kicks to the body, of course has the ability to throw a side kick to the head, he has some nice jabs and right crosses, can switch stances whenever he wants. He's also very light on his feet and moves around the octagon a ton, which has been a strategy that's given Jon problems in the past. And although Ciryl certainly does have power, I don't necessarily think he has enough power to put Jon Jones's lights out. He would just be winning on the scorecards more methodically on the feet, at least in my opinion. But if this matchup were to come to fruition, what Jon would need to do is take this fight to the ground, and I think he would have a lot of success at doing so as well, because Ciryl, especially as we saw in his last matchup against Francis Ngannou, doesn't necessarily have all that much skill in terms of takedown defense, and also doesn't necessarily have that much skill in terms of when he's on his back on the ground. And the fact that Jon is so phenomenal in terms of his takedowns, as well as once he takes the fight to the ground with those elbows in close, and just his ground and pound in general, I think he would have a very easy time with Ciryl on the ground. Now of course there's a possibility that Ciryl would improve his takedown defense and improve his wrestling in general, but I don't necessarily think he would get to a point where he would be able to stop Jon Jones's takedown attempts. And in my opinion, although Ciryl has the advantage on the feet, I think the fact that Jon has such a big advantage in terms of the wrestling would be too much for Ciryl, and Jon would probably win this matchup as well by decision. Now one thing that I do want to say is everything that I did say about Jon in this video in terms of his stand-up, his takedown, his wrestling, his stand-up defense, his takedown defense, his clinch work, all those things are based on Jon at light heavyweight. And in his training footage ever since he has bulked up to heavyweight, it's pretty clear, at least in my mind, that Jon looks a little bit slower, which of course makes sense because he's putting on a lot of weight. So basically the point that I'm trying to make is we don't necessarily know how Jon would look at heavyweight. Maybe there'll be certain aspects of his game that are a little bit different now at heavyweight, so there is some element of surprise is what I'm trying to say. But in my opinion, I think Jon would look very similar to what he did at light heavyweight and still would continue to dominate. But if Jon were to go in that matchup against Stipe and win that and get the interim belt, and then go up against Francis Ngannou and win that potential matchup, which one thing that I do want to mention is I think that's a very difficult matchup for Jon. At that point, I feel like it would be undeniable that Jon Jones is the GOAT. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Jon would be able to dominate at heavyweight, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.